This video is sponsored by Renva Turmeric Shakes, sold on Amazon. Enjoy 3 amazingly delicious flavors: vanilla chai latte, peanut butter cup, and ginger lemon drop. Welcome to the first of 6 classes for the TSD Mindfulness teachings. I'm going to begin by defining mindfulness. So for me, when I'm using the word mindfulness, I'm talking about being aware of your physical environment, being aware of your physical body. Mindfulness is so much about paying attention to the physical. So that would be paying attention to the sounds in your environment, paying attention to the sensations in your body, paying attention to your breath, which is a combination of sound and physical sensations. And also paying attention to something visual with your eyes open would be another example of mindfulness. So that's the first level of what mindfulness is. On a deeper level, mindfulness is also paying attention to your emotions and paying attention to your thinking. Now, TSD mindfulness is a little bit different, and so I'll explain that as well. So TSD mindfulness is about taming the mind, soothing the gut, and dwelling in the heart. So we use traditional mindfulness techniques to tame the mind, such as paying attention to the sounds in your environment or paying attention to your breath would be an example of how we might tame our mind. And I'll go into much more detail on all of those practices in these classes. And then soothing our gut is about paying attention to your nervous system and learning how to soothe your nervous system when it gets activated. So if there's some type of threat, even if it's a threat to your emotional stability, then what will happen is your sympathetic nervous system will activate. And in order to soothe your sympathetic nervous system, we need to activate the parasympathetic nervous system. And the parasympathetic nervous system is what soothes your activation. And there are certain techniques that you'll learn through the TSD mindfulness approach for soothing your nervous system. And dwelling in the heart has to do with really leaning into your authentic experience, whether that is difficult or whether it feels really good. So this involves deep emotions, even the painful emotions. So a good example of dwelling in the heart would be becoming aware of maybe abandonment triggers, feelings of rejection, for example, and really creating some space in your heart to feel those emotions and then to heal through them. And we use a lot of self-compassion techniques to heal through those emotions. And so the dwelling in the heart is really important because we need to really have our attention settle into our heart area to instigate and allow that healing to happen. And it's really difficult to settle your attention in your heart area if your mind is going. So that's why we need to tame the mind. And if your nervous system is activated, it's also really difficult to dwell in the heart, to really settle your attention in your heart area with some of those deep emotional experiences. So that is, in a nutshell, how to describe what TSD mindfulness is. And it does include a lot of traditional mindfulness techniques, but it also, in addition to these traditional mindfulness techniques, has some added techniques for soothing your nervous system and definitely an emphasis on self-compassion. Now, self-compassion and mindfulness are always linked, but in the TSD mindfulness approach, we really bring that self-compassion to light. And this approach is really good for trauma. So if you've had past trauma, using the TSD mindfulness approach is really good for healing that past trauma. But if you haven't had past trauma, the TSD mindfulness approach is really good anyway, where everybody every day is getting their nervous system activated. And so you're going to benefit for sure. So these 6 classes are going to go over several TSD mindfulness teachings, and all of the TSD mindfulness teachings are found in the book Tame, Soothe, Dwell, and that can be purchased for only $7.99 on the tsdmind.org website. So we're going to begin by talking about relationship. So relationship is so important to our mindfulness experience. And the reason is that when we really become mindful of the moment, right, of what's happening right now, and we start to see that there's so many interconnectedness going on. There's so many relationships. And so that's what we're going to begin today, is we're going to be talking about those different relationships. So these relationships are with yourself. So you're going to develop your own relationship with yourself and be more mindful of that relationship. And also relationships with other people, but also relationships with the food that you eat, your relationship with money, your relationship with God, if you're spiritual in that way, really with anything in your life. And so once we start to dig in and take a look at the quality and the details of these relationships, it can really help us understand and find clarity in all those things that we are confused about. It's really powerful. So the TSD mindfulness teaching on this is about moving into perfect relationships. So before I go into that teaching, I want to talk about the word perfect. That can be kind of triggering for some people, right? To try to be perfect. And so some of what you'll notice when you're learning about the TSD mindfulness teachings is we redefine some words. And so perfect is one of those words that we redefine. So I want to start by redefining the word perfect. So often we think of perfect as, everything just has its place. Everything worked out exactly the way it was supposed to. But that's not what we mean here when we use the word perfect. This perfectness is not based on your expectations, like what you think to be perfect. This perfection is based on a system larger than you. So it's more of this big picture interconnectedness of all things in the universe and the perfection in that. And so I'll go into a little bit more detail. I'll tell a story of when I was meditating years ago, and I often will meditate looking at stacked stones. So I have these 3 stones that I'll sit in front of me and I'll look at with my eyes open for my meditation. So I was at a friend's house. I wasn't at home, so I didn't have my stacked stones. So I was trying to find something in the person's house that I could use to meditate. And I like to use something from nature, because if I use something that is not from nature, maybe a statue or something like that, the actual thought that went into creating that statue can be distracting to me during the meditation. But if I look at something from nature, that thought isn't in the thing, and so it isn't as distracting. So I was looking around trying to find something in the house that was from nature, and I found some wood chips. They had a guinea pig and they had all these the bag of clean wood chips. So I grabbed a handful of the clean wood chips and I put them on the table in front of me. So they just kind of scattered and fell in this way. And so I sat there and looked at it and used my mindfulness, right? It's just being aware of the shadows, the colors, the shapes of what I'm looking at. And about 20 minutes into my meditation, things shifted for me. So when I first was looking at the bunch of wood chips, it just looked like a big mess, right? Just nothing that really made sense about it. It was just a pile. But about 20 minutes into my meditation, it switched, and it all of a sudden started looking like each chip was placed in the exact place that it was purposefully, and that it just created this piece of art, really, and that everything was just stacked in such a beautiful way, right? So that's the perfection that we're talking about when we talk about TSD mindfulness, moving into perfect relationships. This perfection that on the outside, it might seem messy, it might not make sense, but when we sit there and we lean into it and we settle into our meditation, we start to see the perfection of it, that all the connectedness and all of the beauty in what it is. So that's what we're talking about when we say perfect. So when we're talking about moving into these perfect relationships, what we're talking about is creating more harmony, more peace, inviting healing into your existing life. And so how could we think about that? So say you feel like you have an unhealthy balance with work, right? So that relationship might not be the best. Your relationship with work might not be the best. And so the idea is that following the TSD mindfulness approach, learning these ways of meditation, then you will find that better relationship with work and have that better life balance. So that's the idea. And the way we do that is by quieting the mind. So learning some meditation techniques that really help support you quiet the mind. And also working with your nervous system, we can actually retrain our nervous system. Our nervous system has been conditioned to respond in a certain way in certain situations. So you might find that your nervous system keeps getting triggered in the same few situations. And that's because it's a conditioned response. It's over the course of your life, it's been conditioned to respond that way. And so with these teachings, what you will do is you will actually recondition your nervous system. And over time, your nervous system won't respond in the way that it had in the past. And another way that you move into these perfect relationships is by opening up more to your emotions, welcoming your emotions, feeling your emotions, sitting with your emotions in a healthy way. So that's the dwelling in the heart part. Working with the nervous system is soothing the gut part. So I have a question for you. Take a moment to consider, what do people usually have relationships with? Just think about that. And it's not just with people. What else might people have relationships with? What else do you have relationships with? Some of the answers might be a relationship with time. What is your relationship with time? Do schedules and things like that cause stress in your life? Do schedules reduce stress in your life? What is your relationship with time? Alcohol. What is your relationship with alcohol, caffeine, different substances, money, structure? What is your relationship with structure? Does structure benefit you? Does structure hold you back? What is that relationship? So these are some of the things that can start to sit with and understand, and leading to more self-understanding and self-acceptance. So as I said earlier, one of the ways that we tame our mind, quiet our thinking, is by paying attention to physical elements, things that are going on in our physical world, things that are going on in our physical body. Really helps our thinking slow down. It helps us not be so engaged with our thinking. So our thinking doesn't have as much power over us. So going back to this idea of sitting in meditation and paying attention to the sounds in the environment, for example, or paying attention to your breath, I have another question for you, and that is, why is that helpful? Why is taking 15 minutes a day, sitting in meditation and listening to the sounds inside your house or outside your house, or listening to your breath or paying attention to the sensations in your body, why does that help? So you can take a moment to think about, why does that help? People usually answer, well, it brings you into the present moment. Okay, so I'll challenge you a little bit more. Why does that help? Why does bringing your attention to the present moment help? And you're probably thinking already, because if you're thinking about the past or we're thinking about the future, then that can cause a lot of thinking. That can even trigger our nervous system, right? So if we can get away from thinking about so much in the future and thinking about the past and just right here, right now, it's probably simpler. The moment right now is probably less complex than what's happened in the past or what you think might happen in the future, right? So those are some ways to think about why it's helpful to just sit and listen to the birds for 15 minutes, for example. But I do want to go into some neuroscience with this and talk about how this practice really helps our brain. So one thing that it does is it helps us create new neural pathways. So what happens is we have these neural pathways that allow us to think in certain ways. So they're like tracks. We're just on these tracks. You might notice that, right? You're in a thought cycle and it goes from stage 1 to stage 2 to stage 3. It's all the time. That's just how you think through certain things, right? You can start to see these patterns. And so that's because of your neural pathways. You have very strong neural pathways for that pattern of thinking. And so what your mindfulness practice does, it actually balances the neural pathways. So those neural pathways that are really strong, it might make them not quite as intense. And then neural pathways that you don't use that much, it might open up those neural pathways so it's easier for you to think in a different way. So that's one of the reasons that this practice, traditional mindfulness practice of paying attention to your body, your breath, sounds, is helpful. Another reason is because of dopamine detox. So we are getting these dopamine releases from texts on our phone, from social media, from food. A yummy food that we eat will give a dopamine release. Sometimes I think I've read that alcohol can do a dopamine release. And the problem is that with some of these unhealthy dopamine releases, there's too much dopamine. There's some dopamine releases that are healthier, like going for a walk in nature. It will release a healthy amount of dopamine. But some of these, gaming or electronics, they really create these unhealthy amounts of dopamine that are released. And so what happens is the body knows that there's too much dopamine. And so what it does is it removes some of the receptors for the dopamine. And so it lowers your dopamine, and it lowers it a lot. And so you end up feeling like a little bit of a crash or just a lower mood. Your mood is just lowered. And so there's this cycle of it's going up, and then your mood is lowered, and then you do something and it kind of goes up, and it's very exhausting, and it's not very good for your mental health. So another reason why sitting and paying attention to the sounds in your environment during your meditation is helpful is because it creates a little bit of a dopamine detox, which means it sets your system up for a healthy amount of dopamine. So you're not too low or you're not too high. It really helps you be in that middle ground. Another reason it's helpful is because it actually grows your brain, like literally the tissue in your brain grows. The cerebellum, which is all around your brain, grows from meditation, for example, which is helpful because that is the part of your brain that helps you process emotions. So if that's stronger and grows, then you're easier. It's easier for you to process emotions. So the studies show that if you practice mindfulness for 20 minutes a day for 6 months, that's when you'll start to notice if you got an MRI or whatever type of measuring device they use, that's when you'll start to notice that the brain is actually changing in its structure. So there's a little bit of neurology for you to understand why this practice, this simple practice, is so beneficial. All right, what you might find after you take some time and practice in settling your mind, quieting your mind, paying attention to some of these physical elements of your environment, you might find that your gut feels tense. And maybe you didn't notice that your gut felt tense because you were so much in your thinking, right? So when we are able to kind of not engage so much with our thinking, then we start to notice other things. And one of the things that you might notice is some tension in your gut area. And this is usually due to some activation of your nervous system. You might not. Your nervous system might be completely calm and you might not notice these things, but you might. And so let's go over that a bit. So this physical tightness, there just might be tightness, there might be strain in your gut area, there might be a little bit of a pain in your stomach area. And if your nervous system is quite triggered, you might feel it higher up. It usually starts lower, and then as the trigger develops, it starts moving up higher. So your nervous system is really triggered, and you might feel the strain more in your chest area. But in the beginning stages or the lighter stages, it'll just be in your abdomen. You also might notice anxious thoughts. That's another way to identify that your nervous system is triggered, is you have these worried thoughts. I'm worried this is going to happen, or this is going to happen. What if this happens? What if I don't get this right? Would be another indication. So we'll go into more detail about soothing your gut in another class. But for now, I just want to mention that anything that has to do with reassuring yourself that in this present moment, right here, right now, you're completely safe, that you're safe. And that's what's going to really help soothe your nervous system. And you want to exist in some level of stability. So reminding yourself about, what is stable about this moment is another way to soothe your nervous system. Your gut doesn't like change, doesn't like things to be unstable. So that's why the reassurance to the stability of things can be really helpful. That's different than the mind. Your mind and your thinking wants change. That's what the thinking is usually about. Well, your rumination is about reflecting on something that happened in the past and thinking about what you could change about it. You're analyzing it for what could have been better. If you're thinking about the future, often that has to do with, what changes do I need to make? What do I need to do to ensure that the outcome is what I want? So you're living in the spectrum, right, of the mind that is really so much yearning and desiring change. And on the other end is your nervous system that just really wants stability. It really wants everything to be preserved. So that's something you can start being mindful of, is kind of bouncing back and forth on that spectrum. So once you have tamed your mind and soothed your gut, then you're ready to do the real healing work, moving your attention into your heart, and making space for those deep emotions and giving yourself compassion, which we'll go over in more detail in a later video. So that concludes teaching number 1, which was the TSD mindfulness objective is to move into perfect relationships. This concludes the TSD mindfulness video for teaching number 1.